The moon hung high in the midnight sky, casting a silver glow over the sprawling fields of Cornett Farm. The shadows stretched long as the wind whispered through the wooden slats of the old farmhouse, an eerie serenade enveloping the quiet night. An owl hooted softly somewhere in the distance, its call echoing through the stillness. Inside that very farmhouse, nestled amid rusted tools and half-empty jars of preserves, farmer Joe Cornett slept soundly, unaware that danger lurked just beyond his haven. He'd worked hard his entire life, sowing seeds and nurturing crops, but tonight his harvest would be something he never expected. Two figures, cloaked in darkness, crept cautiously across the yard. Their movements were calculated, the soft crunch of gravel beneath their sneakers barely registering against the night's rustling backdrop. These were not just any burglars, they were seasoned professionals, driven by desperation and greed. They eyed the farmhouse, its windows glowing with a warm light, a stark contrast to their intentions. "Let's be quick, hit the back door. I'll take the front," whispered the taller one, his voice low and sharp like the knife he tucked into his belt. His companion nodded, scanning the surroundings with a wary gaze. The back door creaked, a haunting sound that sliced through the thick silence. Thankfully, it was well-worn and familiar to Joe, whose routine habits didn't extend to checking locks every night. He'd lived there long enough to trust his land, and tonight's peaceful slumber felt like a low-hanging fruit for the taking bunch. As the burglars slipped inside, the smell of fresh hay met them like an unexpected welcome. The duo moved carefully, breathing in the earthy aroma of the farm. Everything inside was dark except for a soft glow coming from the kitchen. That light was the beacon, a siren call to their greedy hearts. Meanwhile, in the depths of his dreams, Joe stirred. He felt an unusual chill and frowned, tossing aside his quilt. Shadows danced across the floorboards, playing tricks on his sleepy eyes. Something wasn't right. Back in the kitchen, the thieves were now rummaging through drawers, their hands moving swiftly, each piece of silverware a potential jackpot. The shorter one whispered, voice barely above a breath, "Farmers got to have cash lying around somewhere. This is a farm, it's usually easy pickings," the taller one said, eyes gleaming with excitement. But Joe was not just any farmer. He was as much a part of the land as the ancient oak tree in the yard. His days spent toiling under the sun had granted him not only strong arms but a sharper intuition. Suddenly, he shot out of bed, heart racing. He could hear the soft clinking of metal against metal, the unmistakable sound of someone rifling through his possessions. Adrenaline surged through him as he moved silently toward the kitchen, each step an echo of his resolve. "Stay low, let's grab what we can and get out," the taller burglar urged. They were on borrowed time, the houses weren't far apart, and in this tight-knit community, neighbors knew each other well. Any sudden flicker of light would bring curious eyes. Joe reached the kitchen door and paused, his breath catching in his throat. He could see their shadowy figures hunched over, lost in their greed. His heart pounded like a relentless drum. He knew he had to act, and quickly. In one swift motion, he flipped the switch on the wall. The overhead light flooded the room with brightness, illuminating everything in stark clarity. Blinded by the sudden change, the burglars flinched, momentarily frozen like deer caught in headlights. Startled, the shorter one stumbled backward, knocking over a chair with a loud crash. His voice trailed off as their eyes met Joe's, filled with shock and confusion. Joe commanded, his voice booming with the authority of a man who wasn't merely defending his home but his very way of life. The tall burglar recovered first, instinct kicking in. They turned, bolting for the back door. But it didn't matter, Joe was faster. Years of working the land had honed his instincts, readying him for moments like this. With a determined lunge, he slammed the door shut before they could escape, trapping them inside like rats cornered in a cage. Panic washed over the burglars' faces, morphing their greed into fear. The shorter one asked, desperation tinging his voice. Joe shot back, standing tall with fire in his gut. He could feel the anger boiling within him, mingling with a deep-seated fear. Who were these men and what had pushed them to this point? The tall one pleaded, the bravado fading. "We just need some cash, Joe studied their faces. The shorter one had wild eyes, darting around the kitchen, while the other wore the weariness of someone who had fought too many battles and lost sight of hope. It was a desperation Joe knew all too well. "Eating doesn't mean you steal from others," Joe replied, his voice steady but filled with the weight of understanding. "This is my life's work. I swear, we just need to pay rent, my kids." The shorter one's voice cracked, revealing the pain and struggle that lurked beneath his tough exterior. Joe's heart wavered. He remembered the price of desperation, a price he had seen in the eyes of friends who lost their farms during tough seasons. He had been lucky, but not everyone was. He had built this life with blood, sweat, and tears. "Stand over there," Joe commanded, pointing toward the kitchen table. They complied, eyes wide, still afraid yet unsure of what would come next. Joe grabbed his phone from the counter, pausing to think. He could call the police, but then what? These men were lost. They had made terrible choices, but perhaps they could redeem themselves. "Listen, I want to help, but you have to promise to leave this life behind. I can't just let you go," Joe said, meeting their eyes one at a time, gauging their reactions. The taller burglar gulped, a flicker of hope igniting his expression. "Really? No, but you've got to work for it. I need hands on the farm, and food doesn't just magically appear." takes work, Joe shot back, emphasizing his point with a nod toward the sprawling fields outside. The two men exchanged glances. It was a gamble. They'd come to steal, but now their futures were being handed back to them like an undeserved lifeline. Okay, the shorter one said slowly, almost hesitantly, as if the word hung in the air longer than it should have. We'll work. As reality set in, Joe lowered his phone and took a deep breath, sensing a shift in the air. This was not just about the stolen goods anymore, it was about lives changing course. All right, I'll give you a chance, Joe said, an echo of resolve in his tone. You'll start at dawn. You can help prepare for the harvest. For now, you'll sleep in the barn. No funny business, or I'll call the authorities. Nods followed, each man expressing a mix of relief and apprehension. Joe felt the weight of their desperation lift a little, replaced by a flicker of hope. Before these men had walked onto his property, they were strangers. Now they were bound together by an unlikely twist of fate. As dawn broke, golden rays poured over the fields, casting a warm glow on the aftermath of that night. Joe stood on his porch, watching the two men who had entered his life with ill intentions. They now knelt in the soil, hands deep in the earth, digging, planting, breathing life into the land, just as he had done for so many years. Maybe redemption was possible, Joe thought as he took in the sight before him. People could change, he reminded himself, just like the seasons that turned and shifted, bringing new beginnings after the frost of winter. In that moment, the farmhouse, once a scene of chaos and fear, became a symbol of second chances. Joe had faced true terror that night, but instead of giving in, he'd chosen to fight not with fists or fury, but with compassion and understanding. And sometimes that's what it takes to truly protect what you love. As heat crept into the air and the day unfurled like a new canvas, Joe felt not just the weight of the crops to be harvested, but the possibility of transformation blooming right before his eyes. The night was thick with an unsettling silence, the kind that blankets a farmhouse so deeply it feels almost alive. The full moon cast ghostly shadows across the fields of Cornett Farm, illuminating the weathered wood of the old farmhouse. Inside, farmer Jake Cornett lay asleep in his bed, fatigue weaving through his dreams like the gentle rustle of the corn outside his window. But it wasn't the corn that stirred tonight, it was trouble. With deliberate stealth, two figures approached the farmhouse, eyes gleaming in the dark. They moved through fields unseen like whispers on the wind. Their clothes were dark, their intentions clear, fueled by desperation, and they were here for something that didn't belong to them. Stay close, hissed Sam, the taller of the two. His eyes darted around as if the shadows themselves were watching, quick and quiet. His partner, a shorter man named Dave, nodded nervously. Right, just grab whatever we can find. Money, jewelry. As they reached the back door, their breaths quickened, laced with adrenaline and fear. The icy metal of a screwdriver glinted in Sam's hand as he wedged it into the lock, twisting with a skill born of necessity. An audible click rang out, a sound that echoed in the stillness of the night, and the door swung open with a low groan. Inside, darkness swallowed them, wrapping around them like a thick cloak. They crept into the kitchen, the faint smell of hay lingering in the air, mingled with something sweet, perhaps a pie cooling on the counter. But they didn't come for pie. They needed something far more valuable. The moonlight lit up the sparsely decorated room as the two men began to rummage through drawers, their hands darting across the worn surfaces, eager to unveil the treasures hidden within. Just then, a floorboard creaked ominously from the hallway. Jake stirred in his sleep, sensing something was off. He opened his eyes, heart pounding. That creak wasn't the wind, it was more deliberate. Slowly, he swung his feet over the edge of the bed, grounding himself against the familiar chill of the wooden floor. The world outside was still, as if holding its breath. Peering from the bedroom, he could see shadows moving in the kitchen, and his instincts kicked in. Years spent on the farm honed his senses like a finely edged knife. He grabbed the baseball bat resting by the door, the one he used to fend off stray raccoons and meddling deer that threatened his crops, but now it would serve a more pressing purpose. Fear and determination coursed through his veins as he edged toward the kitchen, muscles taut, ready for whatever confrontation awaited him. That familiar scent of sweet pie lingered in the air, a cruel reminder of home and comfort, now soured by the impending threat. Sam urged. He felt the anxious pull of time, knowing they had to be quick. Check the cabinets. Dave's eyes widened, a flicker of doubt igniting within. Their hushed whispers filled the room with a sense of dread, but greed can blind even the most reasonable person. They were too deep now. Sam nodded sharply, shushing his partner, determined to press on. But just as they dove deeper into the cabinets, the air shifted and a shadow loomed in the doorway. Jake stood there, bat raised, adrenaline surging, a lion ready to protect its territory. His voice thundered, a resonant echo that rattled the walls. The burglars froze, hands caught in the act, their faces frozen in shock. The moment stretched out, thick with tension. Jake's pulse quickened. Dave stumbled backward, eyes wide with panic. We were just looking for some," Jake roared, incredulous. Rage mixed with disbelief welled up within him. Years of toil and sweat brought forth a protective instinct, a fierce need to preserve everything he'd built. Sam regained his focus first, stepping forward with a bravado that felt fragile. "Just relax, old man. We're not here to hurt you. Just give us some cash and we'll be gone." But Jake wasn't the kind of man who backed down easily. "You're in the wrong place for that. You want money." The burglars exchanged glances, uncertainty creeping into their expressions. Dave asked, a tremor in his voice. "I mean, get out," Jake said, his grip tightening on the baseball bat. "Or you can help me in the fields tomorrow." "You need money," Sam scoffed, disbelief mingling with a hint of desperation. "Or I can call the police," Jake said flatly, the truth hanging heavy in the air. Dave's shoulders drooped, realization dawning. They could run, but that would only lead them into darker waters. Perhaps working the fields was less risky than facing the law. "Fine, we'll work," Sam said finally, the bravado all but vanished. "The cash won't come until the harvest is done. You know how farming works," Jake replied, the edge of his voice softening slightly. "Great," Dave muttered, frustration lining his features. "Better than the police," Sam frowned. With reluctance, Jake lowered the bat. There was an unspoken understanding. These men were desperate. They carried a weight that Jake knew all too well. He had faced his share of hardships, yet they never compelled him to cross a line. "All right," he said slowly. "You can sleep in the barn tonight. At dawn, we'll start working the fields." The sense of defeat hung heavily in the air as they processed their defeat. For the first time, the weight of their choices settled in. They shuffled toward the barn, heads hung low. The stars twinkled above them, a stark counterpoint to their predicament. The barn smelled of hay and livestock, a warm embrace following their cold, restless night. In the dead of night, Jake couldn't sleep. The thoughts churned in his mind like an unsettling storm. He had seen the fear in their eyes, but also the glimmer of something else, the desperate hope of men pushed to extremes by circumstances. Was he doing the right thing? Could he truly help them change course? As dawn slowly crept over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and orange, Jake found himself standing outside the barn. The morning light illuminated the path ahead and offered a glimpse of possibility. He could hear stirring from inside, voices low as they exchanged words, a mix of embarrassment and uncertainty. "Get up," Jake called, his voice cutting through the early morning air like a train whistle. Sam and Dave emerged from the barn, eyes squinting against the light, warily eyeing the man who had seemingly turned their night upside down. They were both a mess, disheveled and dirty, but there was a shift in the atmosphere. "First, we'll gather supplies. We're prepping the land," Jake instructed. "Every day matters in farming." The day unfolded like a well-rehearsed song. They worked hard, each shoveling dirt, pulling weeds, lifting crates filled with freshly picked vegetables. Jake watched closely, offering guidance, finding an unexpected camaraderie amidst the labor. Jake asked Sam during a break, wiping the sweat from his brow. "Just got out of a rough spot," Sam admitted, shrugging. "Lost my job, bills stacked up. It felt like stealing was the only option left." Jake nodded, understanding. He recalled the night a storm had ripped through the farm years ago, flattening crops, leaving him you pick up the pieces. Everyone faced storms, but the real strength was not in weathering them alone. As they spoke, the tension began to dissolve, replaced by a fragile bond woven through labor. Later that afternoon, as they sipped cold water beneath the shade of an old oak, Dave spoke up. "You really didn't have to give us a chance, you know." "Maybe," Jake replied, reflecting. "Or you could have ended up trapped in a cycle of bad choices." Their eyes met, and for the first time, Jake saw more than just desperation reflected there. He saw a flicker of hope. Days turned into weeks, and as the harvest season approached, Sam and Dave earned their keep. The weight of their past slowly lifted with every honest day's work, the muscles in their bodies strengthened by toil rather than theft. They learned the rhythm of the days, the planting, the nurturing, and finally, the harvest. One evening, after a long day laboring in the fields, they sat around a fire pit Jake had constructed. The night air was cool, the stars brilliant against the dark canvas above. They shared stories, laughter dancing around them like the flames. "Guess we never thought we'd end up here," Sam reflected, shaking his head in disbelief. "No kidding, but it feels good, you know, building something instead of tearing it down," Dave added, warmth coloring his cheeks. Jake listened, feeling a surge of pride. "You've both got your own choices to make now. Don't waste this chance," he said, a fatherly tone lacing his voice. And that was when Jake realized he had not only saved these men from their darker inclinations, but had also crafted a new path for himself. The air crackled with potential, an energy of new beginnings radiating from the heart of that farmhouse where once only shadows had lingered. The weeks passed, and soon the harvest was in full swing. Neighbors came to help, gathering in camaraderie, laughter, and hard-earned fruit of labor. Sam and Dave stood proudly by Jake, no longer the desperate figures who had invaded his home. They were now integral parts of the community, contributors in more ways than one. On the final day of harvest, they celebrated as friends, no longer just a farmer holding a bat and two men who had crossed a line. They were a team. And as Jake looked around at the bountiful crops and the smiling faces, he felt a warmth that eclipsed the sun shining overhead. That summer had forged something extraordinary from desperation, a connection that went beyond forgiveness. By opening his home and heart, Jake not only protected what was his, but he also became the catalyst for transformation. In the end, it wasn't just a matter of catching burglars. It was about understanding what it meant to truly catch someone before they fell too far. As the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving trails of pink and gold, Jake, Sam, and Dave stood side by side, knowing that sometimes redemption is found not just in the fields of labor, but in the shared spirit of hope and the possibility of a second chance. The moon hung like a watchful eye above Cornett Farm, its silver light spilling over the fields, illuminating the silhouettes of crops standing tall against the night sky. It was a tranquil evening, the kind that lulled the weary into a deep sleep. Inside the weather-worn farmhouse, farmer Jake Cornett rested, his broad shoulders sinking into the comfort of his easy chair. Outside, the night felt still, but tensions brewed just beneath the surface. Two figures skirted along the edges of the property, their breaths quick and shallow, nerves tingling. They were not ghosts of the night, they were burglars driven by desperation and hunger. Sam and Dave had walked a long path of poor choices, and tonight they had one goal in mind, everything the farm could offer. "Stay close, Sam," Dave hissed, fear mixing with adrenaline as they approached the back of the farmhouse. "We can get in and out quick, just grab some cash and maybe a few tools." "Yeah, all right." Sam's voice was uneasy, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. He pushed the feelings aside and focused on the task at hand. They were too far down the dark road to turn back now. With a screwdriver in hand, Sam poked and prodded at the back door's lock. The sound of the metal scraping against metal echoed against the stillness of the night, a menacing sound that shattered the calm. With a final twist, the door creaked open, revealing a world of uncertainty within. Stepping inside, the air was thick with the warm scent of hay mingling with something sweet and tantalizing, perhaps a pie cooling on the counter. But they weren't there for dessert. They were on a mission driven by the raw, gnawing need for survival. Jake stirred in his sleep halfway across the house, the sound of the door forced open causing him to bolt upright. Shadows moved in the kitchen and the weight of his instincts kicked in. Heart racing, he swung his feet onto the cold wooden floor and stood, listening intently. Every second ticked by, amplifying the sounds of the intruders rummaging through his home. Dave whispered, the noise from the kitchen cutting through the clouds of uncertainty hanging in the air. "Shut up and keep looking," Sam snapped, fear inching into his voice. "There's got to be cash somewhere." Jake shuffled toward the kitchen, muscles tense. He grabbed the baseball bat resting against the wall, memories flooding his mind of how many times he had used it to chase away stray animals that threatened his crops. Now it would serve an entirely different purpose. He was ready to defend everything he held dear. As Jake edged closer, he could see the figures moving, their silhouettes illuminated by the soft glow of the kitchen light. They had no business being in his home, and anger swelled within him. Jake's voice boomed, filled with authority. The burglars froze, faces betraying their shock. They turned slowly, eyes wide as they registered the presence of the farmer who had caught them in the act. Jake growled, stepping forward, bat poised and ready. Dave stumbled backward, fear etched on his face. "Wait, we didn't mean any harm." Jake cut him off. "You're in my house." Sam regained his composure, stepping forward, the bravado surfacing with palpable desperation. "Listen, old man, we're not here to cause trouble." Breathless silence hung in the air, tension crackling like a storm waiting to break. Jake took a moment to size them up, realizing these weren't hardened criminals. They were two desperate men pushed to the edge by circumstance. Fear morphed into understanding, and in that moment he made a choice. Jake's voice softened slightly. "Then you'll earn it. Work for what you're trying to steal." Confusion clouded the burglars' faces. "What do you mean work?" Dave insisted, a flicker of hope mixed with doubt. "No, you won't. Not if you have any sense left. The police would haul you off." The hesitation hung between them like thick smoke. "Out in the fields, you'll learn what real work feels like," Jake continued, sounding more like a mentor than a captor. "You need to understand that this is not an easy life." Silence stretched as the thieves exchanged glances, the weight of their choices bearing down on them. Relief washed over them almost simultaneously. This was their way out, their shot at something better than theft. "Fine," Sam said finally, the defiance leaking from his voice. "Good," Jake said, lowering the bat and motioning for them to follow. "You'll sleep in the barn tonight." The two men shuffled past him, heads hung low, and Jake felt a shift within him. He had seen despair before, the kind that made people do unthinkable things, but he could foster something real here, something that could lead to redemption. As they settled into the barn that night, the scent of hay and horses hung in the air, a familiar embrace for Jake, but foreign for his new guests. He could hear them whispering, each murmur another step on a long road of choices. The dawn broke with renewed purpose. As the first rays of sunlight crept into the barn, Jake stood at the entrance, ready to greet the day. The burden of their previous actions played heavily on Sam and Dave's faces as they emerged, rubbing sleep from their eyes. They had a long day ahead of them. Jake called, a hint of encouragement in his voice. "Get your boots on." The sun rose higher, warming the earth as the trio ventured into the fields. Jake explained each step in the process, from tilling the soil to fertilizing and eventually planting seeds. Most importantly, he shared stories, weaving his life experiences into the lessons he taught. As the sun climbed higher, sweat dripped down their foreheads. It was hard work, but it was honest work. Farmer Jake watched as the spirit of the land seeped into Sam and Dave, their muscles slowly growing stronger, their bodies shedding old habits like the dirt on their hands. During lunch, Jake broke bread with them, the three sitting under the large oak tree at the edge of the field. Here they shared laughter and stories, the tension from that fateful night dissolving with every bite of sandwich. Dave took a deep breath, the feeling of gratitude filling him as he ventured. "We didn't thought we'd end up here, you know." "Yeah," Sam chimed in, shaking his head. "The path to change can be slow and painful," Jake said, nodding, a knowing look in his eyes. Days turned into weeks, and with every sun that rose, the weight of their actions softened. Sam and Dave embraced the work wholeheartedly, learning to pour care into the earth like a new kind of currency. They dug, planted, and tended to the crops alongside Jake, sunsets painting the sky with colors as rich and deep as the earth they had grown to love. The transformative nature of labor strained the bonds that had once tied them to a life of crime. Slowly but surely, they built something new together, not only a better relationship with the land, but a newfound respect for themselves and their choices. As the final weeks of the harvest approached, the farm flourished. The fields were alive with colors and scents, the crops bountiful and ripe for the picking. On the day of the harvest, neighbors arrived, ready to help gather the fruits of their labor. Sam and Dave stood taller, their faces radiating pride as they worked side by side with Jake under the warm sun, their hands working in rhythm with the hum of the community around them. "Look at this, fellas," Jake said with enthusiasm ringing through his voice as they surveyed the fields brimming with ripeness. The sweat on their brows mingled with laughter, stories flowing freely, each moment a reminder of how far they had come together. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the land, the sense of accomplishment swelled within them. That night, as they gathered around the dinner table for a meal made of their hard work, Jake looked over at Sam and Dave. No longer were they just two troubled souls, they had become partners, friends woven into the fabric of his life. "Thank you for giving us a chance," Dave said, looking earnestly at Jake. "You didn't have to do this." "Sometimes the right choice isn't the easy one," Jake replied, smiling. "You showed me that change is possible." As the stars emerged one by one, they laughed and shared stories. The warmth of their bond filled the farmhouse as they celebrated not just the harvest, but the journey that had brought them together. In the end, it wasn't just about catching burglars on one fateful night. It was about planting the seeds of redemption and witnessing life bloom in ways they had never expected. Each moment on that farm became a testament to the strength found in community, compassion, and the power of second chances. As they sat together, a new future unfolding with every star that brightened the night sky, they knew they had found more than just crops thriving in the fields. They had found their own way back to life. The night was thick with shadows as Farmer Tom Collins settled into his easy chair, the flickering light from the old lamp casting a glow across his weathered face. The farmhouse was quiet, a sanctuary built from years of hard work and dedication. Outside, the wind whispered through the tall corn stalks, a gentle reminder of nature's rhythm. But tonight, that peace was about to shatter. Two figures crept down the gravel path toward the farmhouse, their breaths barely audible, hearts pounding in sync driven by desperation. Jack and Leah were no strangers to trouble. The night was fresh, their jackets pulled tight against the chill and their minds racing as they made their way to a life of crime. Leah whispered, glancing nervously at Jack. Jack hissed. For him, the fear mixed with excitement, the thrill of an easy score speeding through his veins. "We get in, grab whatever cash he has, and we're out. No one will even notice." They approached the back door, illuminated by a single glow from the kitchen window, teasing them with the promise of easy wealth. Jack fumbled with a screwdriver, forcing it into the lock. The sound of metal scraping echoed in the still night air, a sharp reminder of what they were about to do. With a quick twist, the lock gave way, the door creaking open as if inviting them into a treasure trove of opportunity. Inside, the smell of freshly baked pie swirled around them, an oddly comforting scent in an unsettling environment. It made Leo hesitate. He murmured, fingers trembling. "Then we run, just focus on the cash," Jack snapped back, a hint of frustration mixing with the urgency in his tone. The kitchen was dim, an old farmhouse charm that had withstood time and weather, jars of preserves lining the shelves like sentinels. They moved quietly, adrenaline surging as they rifled through drawers, swallowing their unease. But then came a sudden sound, a creak of floorboards from the hallway. The men froze, hearts thudding wildly in their chests. Inside the bedroom, Tom stirred awake, jolted from sleep by the unsettling noise. There was something wrong. He could feel it deep in his gut. He quickly dressed, the weight of his instincts heavy upon him. Years of farming had given him not just strong hands, but an acute awareness of his surroundings. As he stepped into the hallway, the shadows danced against the walls, and a thought collided with the fear. Someone was in his house. Leo whispered, panic bubbling in his voice. Jack urged, but before they could move, Tom stepped into the kitchen, bat in hand, a guardian ready to defend his territory. Tom's voice thundered, filled with an authority that came from decades of protecting what was rightfully his. The burglars turned, their faces ghostly pale under the kitchen lights, caught in a moment that stretched infinitely. Fear gripped Leo more than Jack, who clung to a facade of bravado. Jack shouted, stepping forward though his heart raced in his chest. "Look, we just want some cash and we'll be gone." Tom stood tall, bat raised, weighing his options as he scanned the intruders. These were not hardened criminals. Desperation danced in their eyes, and he could see the foolishness of their choices. "Get out of my house," Tom commanded, the unwavering strength in his voice echoing through the kitchen. Leo blurted, trembling, "We don't want trouble, just let us take some money." Starving, the words struck a chord deep within Tom. He could see it now, the weariness etched across their faces, the defeated stance of two men pushed to the edge. He had felt hunger too, but he had never resorted to theft. Tom replied, his voice softer now, a frown of disbelief on his brow. "You want cash. You'll earn it." The audacity of the offer stunned the burglars, confusion etched on their faces. "What work?" Jack said, brow furrowed. "I'm not joking. If you want something, you have to earn it." Tom lowered the bat slightly, weighing their desperate expressions. "You'll be better off working here than running from the cops," Tom added, locking eyes with Leo, who still trembled with fear. Jack hesitated before glancing at Leo, his partner's expression a mixture of hope and disbelief. "Help me on the farm," Tom offered. "Sunrise to sunset, it won't be easy, but it'll keep you out of trouble." Leo blinked, the fear in his eyes slowly ceding to contemplation. Jack, sensing the shift, nodded slowly and with a breath of resignation, agreed. The tension shifted as Tom, still cautious, lowered the bat completely. "All right then, you'll sleep in the barn tonight." As they moved to the barn, Tom felt a flicker of something akin to hope. It wasn't just about catching criminals, perhaps he could redirect their paths. Night enveloped them like a forgotten blanket as Jack and Leo settled into the barn. The comforting sense of hay and livestock mixed with their unease as they lay on the straw, contemplating the journey that had brought them to this point. In the morning, a soft light pierced through the cracks of the barn, and as dawn broke, Tom stood waiting at the entrance. The tired faces of the two newcomers emerged, and he could see uncertainty lingering in their eyes. He called, a hint of encouragement in his voice, "Get your boots on." The morning unfolded, each moment a reminder of the hard work that awaited them. Tom led them into the fields, explaining how to till the soil and plant the seeds. Every shovelful, he instilled not just labor, but a newfound sense of purpose in them. As day turned to evening, Tom witnessed a transformation. Jack and Leo, once burdened by their past, were slowly beginning to shed the layers of their old identities. They hoed, they pulled weeds, and with sweat dripping down their brows, they found a kind of satisfaction they'd long forgotten. During a lunch break beneath the sprawling oak tree, they shared simple sandwiches, the air filled with laughter they hadn't known they needed. Jack leaned back, feeling oddly content for the first time in ages. He chuckled, glancing at Leo. "You serious? I thought we'd end up in jail," Leo replied, grinning. "But I feel hard work does that," Tom replied, his eyes glinting with a knowing smile. "You'll see." These melted into weeks, and as harvest season approached, an undeniable bond formed between them. Sam and Leo moved from merely being thieves to being part of a community, learning the rhythm of farm life. They discovered skills in themselves they never knew existed. The fields, once merely a source of income for Tom, became a canvas for growth both for the crops and the two men. "Look at these fields," Tom said one afternoon as they surveyed the green waves dancing in the breeze. "This is your reward." And they had, through toil and sweat, they had reclaimed a piece of themselves. They spent evenings around the fire, the fading light showcasing a brotherhood built on mutual respect and hard-earned friendship. As the final harvest day drew near, excitement permeated the air. Neighbors came to lend a hand, and the night before, Tom hosted a gathering. They shared laughter and stories, a beautiful tapestry woven from shared struggles. Sam and Leo stood shoulder to shoulder with Tom, proud of their work and the friendships they formed in the process. On the last day of the harvest, they worked side by side, picking the fruits of their labor. Laughter rang through the air as they fanned out across the vast fields, baskets in hand filled to the brim. As the sun set that evening, painting the sky in warm hues, they gathered once more, eyes shining with hope and gratitude. "Thank you for believing in us," Leo said, his voice steady, a newfound strength behind it. "You didn't just help us, you changed our lives," Jack added, emotion thick in the air. Tom looked at them, pride swelling within him. "You did this, you took a chance, and you grew from it." That night, as they sat around a fire, the glow of the flames flickering against their faces, Tom felt a contentment he hadn't realized he was missing. He'd not only caught burglars, he had helped reshape their destinies. And as the stars lit up the night sky, illuminating their dreams, they found a sense of peace, a camaraderie forged by trials and tribulations. In the end, the farmhouse that had once served as the backdrop for a confrontation had become a place of transformation. That night was more than just a moment of danger. It was the beginning of a journey that brought three people from different worlds together, reminding them all that redemption comes in many forms. Tom looked at Jack and Leo, now friends rather than foes, and knew they would all stand together, empowered by their choices, ready to face the dawn of a new day hand in hand. The moon hung low, a sickle of silver in a dark sky, casting an uncertain glow over the sprawling fields of the Collins farm. Farmhouse, a sturdy structure weathered by years and storms, seemed to breathe in the stillness. Inside, Farmer Glenn Collins was lost in a deep sleep, unaware that danger lurked just outside his door. In the shadow of a nearby barn, two figures moved stealthily, their hearts racing. Jack and Leo were desperate men, driven not by a love for the thrill, but by the gnawing hunger in their bellies. Tonight wasn't just about robbery, it was survival. "We've got to be quick," Jack whispered, sweat beading at his brow. Their eyes flickered toward the farmhouse, its windows glowing faintly with the warmth of home. Just a few slivers of cash, a handful of supplies, that's all they needed. Leo's stomach churned at the thought of what they were about to do, but he swallowed hard and nodded, desperation outweighing fear. As they edged closer, Jack took a moment to steady himself. He approached the back door, the wood rough under his fingertips. He asked, eyes darting back to Leo. "Yeah. Let's just get it over with," Leo replied, though his hands trembled like leaves in the wind. With a quick twist of a screwdriver, the lock clicked open and the door creaked as they slipped into the darkened farmhouse. The warmth of the place welcomed them, an inviting contrast to the chill of the night. Their senses heightened, they moved cautiously through the kitchen filled with the sweet aroma of freshly baked pies, a scent that felt like a cruel taunt in their current predicament. "Let's check the drawers," Jack whispered, already knee-deep in their mission. He pulled out a handful of utensils, tossing them aside as if they were worthless. "Focus on cash." In a nearby bedroom, a sudden noise shattered the tranquility. A soft thud filled the air, causing both burglars to freeze. They held their breath, listening intently. There it was again, the unmistakable sound of footsteps on the wooden floor. Glenn had awakened. Leo's voice trembled, panic swelling inside him. Jack hissed, his bravado slipping. They scrambled to hide behind the kitchen island, hearts racing. Glenn Collins appeared in the hallway, hair tousled and eyes bleary from sleep, clutching a baseball bat as he stepped into his kitchen, ready to confront whatever threat had dared breach his home. Glenn's voice echoed, rich and deep, a roar grounded in years of hard work and resilience. The burglars exchanged panicked glances. They were cornered like animals caught in a trap. The tension in the air thickened as they held their breath, the moment stretching out into an eternity. Finally, Glenn stepped into the kitchen, bat raised, eyes scanning the shadows. He shouted, fierce and commanding, the authority in his voice shaking Jack and Leo to their core. "Wait," Jack blurted out, forcing his voice to remain steady. Both men stepped cautiously from behind the counter, hands raised in surrender. Glenn's frown deepened, and he studied them both, trying to decipher the layers of desperation on their faces. He saw not hardened criminals, but two men grasping at straws, shadows of themselves. He felt a flicker of something more than anger, an understanding born from the tough seasons of life he too had faced. "Listen," Glenn started, gripping the bat tighter, not quite ready to lower it. "You walked into my home." Leo's voice cracked, desperation leaking through. "Work," Glenn said, the word hanging heavy in the air. "You'll help me on the farm. You want cash, you'll earn it." Jack and Leo exchanged incredulous glances, the weight of Glenn's offer sinking in. They knew there was truth in his words, but fear mingled with the flicker of hope flashing in their minds. I don't know," Jack stammered, the bravado faltering as reality sank in. Glenn challenged, lowering the bat slightly. "I've worked this land since I was a boy." Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, Sam nodded. "All right, let's do it." With a cautious heart, Glenn lowered the bat entirely. "Fine, you'll sleep in the barn tonight." As they moved to the barn, Leo felt a strange mix of gratitude and anxiety. They stepped inside the dimly lit structure, the earthy smells wrapping around them. It was a far cry from the cozy life they had hoped to steal, but it was warm and it was safe. That night, lying on the straw, they pondered their choices beneath a blanket of stars. Jack turned to Leo, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know, but it's better than the alternative," Leo replied, still riddled with anxiety. Dawn broke with the promise of labor at the Collins farm. Glenn called to them from the barn entrance, the morning sun glinting off his weathered features. Time to get up. The air was crisp as they joined Glenn outside, the warmth of the sun washing over them. Glenn explained their tasks for the day, planting seeds, tending to the animals, and repairing the fences. Each movement was rooted in the rhythm of farm life, a cadence they hadn't known in a long time. Glenn asked as they worked, his voice steady but curious. Jack shifted awkwardly, glancing at Leo before he answered. "Lost my job, bills piled up. I've been there before," Glenn admitted, pausing to wipe the sweat from his brow. "Life can throw some hard punches, but trust me, stealing won't solve anything." Days turned into weeks as they toiled together. Every drop of sweat seemed to wash away the grime of their past choices. Jack and Leo, once desperate and anxious, now began to find pride in their labor. Together, they fixed fences, planted crops, and learned the art of ranching. During breaks, they shared stories and laughter, the heaviness of their lives dissolving with every passing day. They learned about each other. Glenn shared tales of storms that had tested the farm, the struggles that had shaped his character. Sam and Leo began to open up too, revealing fragments of their lives, the choices that had brought them to this unlikely crossroads. One afternoon, as they leaned against the barn, Jack turned to Glenn. "You think we can really turn this around?" Glenn looked out at the fields stretching before them, feeling the warmth of the sun on his skin. "Every day you put in the hard work, you're taking one step closer to a new life." As harvest season approached, the transformation was undeniable. The crops flourished under their care, and so did their spirits. Jack and Leo stood taller, their faces no longer shadowed by fear and uncertainty. They had become part of the farm, a part of something larger than themselves. On harvest day, the sun rose glowing bright, and Glenn gathered a community of friends to help bring in the fruits of their labor. Laughter filled the air as they shared stories, the fields alive with energy. Jack and Leo worked side by side with Glenn, smiles painted across their faces as they collected the bounty they had nurtured together. As they gathered in the barn that evening, tired yet fulfilled, Jack turned to Glenn, a sincere expression crossing his face. "Thanks for believing in us." Glenn smiled warmly. "You earned it, boys." Underneath the stars, they shared a meal, joy and laughter intermingling with gratitude. Jack and Leo felt a sense of belonging they had thought lost forever. "Life's not easy, but it's worth it," Glenn said, eyes twinkling. As they finished their meal, a comfortable silence settled around them. The weight of the past had lifted, revealing a new horizon for all three men. The farmhouse and fields were no longer just symbols of hard work. They were a testament to resilience, redemption, and the power of second chances. In that moment, they stood united, bound not by the choices they had made, but by the courage it took to change course. The harvest wasn't just a collection of crops. It symbolized the fruits of their labor and the possibilities that lay ahead. As they turned to watch the stars twinkle above, they knew they would face whatever came next together, the farmer and the two men who had once stood against everything he represented. Together, they had forged a new path rooted in understanding, growth, and hope. The night was suffocatingly quiet, a heavy blanket of darkness shrouding Colin's farm. The only sounds were the gentle rustling of corn stalks swaying in the wind and the distant croak of frogs from the nearby pond. Inside the farmhouse, the glow of a single lamp illuminated the kitchen, where Farmer Glenn Collins was savoring the last bites of a homemade pie. He wiped his mouth with a napkin, the sweet taste still lingering on his tongue, and sighed contentedly. But outside, two figures were creeping through the shadows, hearts racing, adrenaline coursing through their veins. Jack and Leo were not just any thieves, they were desperate men pushed to the brink by hunger and despair. They had been friends for years, but the choices they had made led them down a dark path. Tonight, they had one goal: to slip into the farmhouse, grab whatever they could find, and vanish into the night. "Stay low and quiet," Jack whispered, glancing nervously at Leo. Leo nodded, swallowing hard. "I'm not cut out for this, Jack. Just think of the cash," Jack urged, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the moment. They approached the back door, which stood slightly ajar, a tempting invitation. Jack reached for the knob, his heart pounding like a drum. "It's now or never," he muttered, the words almost lost to the night. With one swift motion, he pushed the door open, and it creaked ominously as they slipped inside. The kitchen was dark except for the gentle glow from the lamp, casting flickering shadows against the walls. The air was thick with the smell of baked goods, warm, inviting, yet unbearably torturous for two hungry men. Jack's stomach growled in protest as he imagined the pies cooling on the counter. "Let's check the drawers," Jack said, already rifling through utensils with no care for their value. Leo lingered back, uncertainty gnawing at him. He asked, glancing nervously toward the dim hallway that led to the bedrooms. "Then we run," Jack retorted, impatience seeping into his voice. He continued rummaging through drawers, tossing aside forks and spoons as if they were nothing. But the very air shifted in that moment. A floorboard creaked, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps padding softly through the house. Glenn Collins stirred in his sleep, instincts honed by years of working the land driving him from his dreams to a reality that felt all too familiar. Glenn's voice echoed through the kitchen, deep and resonant, commanding attention. The burglars froze, caught in the act like deer in headlights. "Quick," Jack hissed, but there was nowhere to go. They ducked behind the kitchen island, hearts pounding, breath shallow, waiting for the inevitable. As Glenn emerged from his bedroom, he squinted into the darkness, bat in hand. The kitchen was eerily quiet except for the sound of his own footsteps. He called out, his voice steady despite the fear creeping into his gut. "Come on, man," Leo whispered, a tremor in his voice. "Shut up," Jack shot back, panic threading through his bravado. They edged lower, praying to remain unseen as Glenn stepped closer, the light catching his determined gaze. Glenn shouted, anger flaring up within him. The feeling of invasion was palpable. No one had the right to trespass on his home. Finally, unable to conceal themselves any longer, Jack summoned what little courage he had left. "We're," he shouted, stepping out from behind the counter with his hands raised. Leo followed, his voice shaking. Glenn's eyes narrowed, fury boiling beneath the surface. "You think you can just break into my house?" Leo added, his voice breaking. "We're just hungry." The words hung in the air, a testament to desperation. Glenn could see the fear in their eyes, the thin veneer of bravado crumbling before him. These weren't hardened criminals, they were lost souls seeking solace in the wrong ways. In a flash, he shifted from anger to understanding, a complex swirl of emotions flashing in his heart. "Money doesn't come easy," Glenn said, his voice firm but softer than before. "If you want something, you have to work for it. Is that what you want?" The burglars exchanged confused glances. Jack asked, bewildered by the suggestion. Glenn reiterated, lowering the bat slightly but keeping his grip firm. You can help me on the farm, I'll pay you. Leo blinked, the weight of the offer settling in. You mean we can stay in? Glenn's voice was calm, but the authority behind it brooked no arguments. You work hard, and at the end of the month, I'll pay you, no police. Jack felt something shift inside him. Their situation was dire, and he knew that stealing was a path that only led to more trouble. It wasn't just the promise of cash, it was an unexpected lifeline. He glanced over at Leo, who nodded slightly, urging him to make the decision. Fine, Jack said, his voice steadied by a renewed sense of purpose. Good, Glenn said, lowering the bat completely. You'll sleep in the barn tonight. The three of them walked to the barn, the tension of their earlier confrontation hanging over them like a dark cloud. Inside, it smelled of hay and earth, a welcome contrast to the fear and desperation that had driven them to this moment. Settled in under the vast expanse of stars, Jack and Leo lay on the straw, each lost in their thoughts. Leo asked, voice barely above a whisper. Maybe, Jack mused, staring up at the ceiling of the barn. We've got a chance. Morning arrived with the sun bursting over the horizon, casting a warm glow across the fields. Glenn stood at the barn entrance, waiting for them as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the trees. He called out cheerfully. The air was crisp and filled with the aromas of the farm, fresh earth and blooming flowers. Jack and Leo emerged from the barn, rubbing the sleep from their eyes and taking in the beauty surrounding them. They were no longer just thieves, they were about to embark on a journey of hard work and redemption. Glenn assigned them their tasks for the day, tilling the fields, planting seeds, and repairing fences. With each swing of the tool, they felt something within them begin to change. The rhythm of farm life was foreign yet grounding, a melody they hadn't realized they'd been missing. As the sun rose higher, sweat trickled down their brows, and Glenn's voice cut through the sound of toil. He asked, genuinely curious as they took a break beneath a shady oak tree. Jack exchanged glances with Leo before answering. Lost my job, bills piled up. I've been there, Glenn admitted, his voice low. Life can hit hard, but think about it, what you're doing now, this is how you build something. They continued to work side by side, their muscles straining against the labor, but their hearts lightening. Each day that passed, Jack and Leo felt more at home on the farm. The shadows of their past decisions began to fade, replaced by purpose and a newfound respect for the land. One evening, gathered around a fire after a long day of work, Jack turned to Glenn, his voice wavering with sincerity. Thanks for giving us a chance. And I thought I'd have to call the police, Glenn chuckled, shaking his head. As harvest season approached, the crops began to thrive under their care. The farm transformed, bursting with colors and life. Jack and Leo had found their place not just as workers, but as valuable members of the community. On the eve of the harvest, Glenn invited friends and neighbors over. There was laughter and joy, baskets filled with the fruits of their hard work. As they gathered under the stars, Jack and Leo felt a sense of belonging they had never known before. The next day, with the sun shining brightly, they stood together in the fields, picking ripe tomatoes and corn. Jack looked over at Leo, his eyes shining with determination. We did this, he said, beaming with pride. We actually turned our lives around, Leo replied, a wide smile breaking across his face. As they loaded their bounty onto a truck, Glenn watched from afar, a satisfied smile creeping over his face. He had offered them a second chance, and they had seized it with both hands. Finally, when the last tomato was picked and the day began to fade, Glenn gathered everyone together. Thank you for your hard work, he announced, his voice steady. Jack and Leo stood in the crowd, eyes glistening with gratitude and respect. No one could take away their hard-earned labor. It had transformed them from desperate thieves into men of purpose. As the day faded, they celebrated not only their harvest, but the journey they had all taken together. The warmth of friendship filled the air as they shared stories and laughter under the vast, starlit sky. In that moment, Jack and Leo knew they had escaped the life that once threatened to consume them. They were no longer defined by their choices, but by their resolve to change. Suddenly, this farmhouse, once a scene of fear and desperation, had become a symbol of new beginnings. As they looked over the fields, Jack turned to Glenn, gratitude spilling from his heart. Remember, Glenn replied, a fatherly warmth in his voice, change comes from within. You've both done something powerful. And as the stars sparkled overhead, Jack and Leo knew that they had found not only a chance at redemption, but a bond that would run deep. The farmer and his two companions stood side by side, ready to face whatever came next, knowing they would do it together. From that night forward, their lives were intertwined, woven into the rich fabric of the farm and the community they had come to cherish. They had caught the light of hope in their hearts, forever grateful for the unexpected turn that had brought them together, turning shadows into something beautiful. A thick blanket of darkness lay over Colin's farm, the only sounds coming from the distant rustle of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. Somewhere in the depths of the farmhouse, Farmer Glenn Collins stirred in his sleep, unaware of the figures lurking in the shadows outside. Two men crept through the knee-high grass, their hearts pounding like war drums. Jack and Leo, best friends bound by a history of bad choices, were now tangled in a desperate scheme to grab whatever they could from the farmhouse that night. Their gazes were fixated on the light spilling through the kitchen window, a beacon of temptation and warmth that felt miles away from their frigid reality. Leo asked, his voice barely above a whisper. A knot of doubt twisted in his stomach, each second of stillness twisting tighter. Jack snapped, his voice cold. We can't go back empty-handed, just think of the money. Jack pushed ahead, his determination igniting a flicker of resolve in Leo. They pushed through the back gate, careful not to make too much noise. Risking everything felt like the only option left, but even desperation couldn't shake off the creeping feeling that they were making a grave mistake. With one swift motion, Jack pulled out his screwdriver and jimmied the back door. The gentle click of the latch became a rallying cry, urging them forward. They stepped inside the house silently, their feet gliding across the cool wooden floor as they entered a world filled with risk and reward. The kitchen greeted them with the comforting scent of baked goods, a stark contrast to the desperation that had driven them here. Jack's stomach growled in protest, reminding him of the hunger gnawing at him. We should hurry, he urged, rummaging through drawers like a man possessed, pulling out spoons and forks and leaving them scattered on the floor. Leo whispered, peering into the dimly lit room where everything felt larger than life. Jack pointed toward the small cabinet against the wall. Check there, he instructed, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. But before Leo could pull open the door, a sudden creak echoed through the house, slicing through the silence like a knife. Fear washed over them, and adrenaline surged as they held their breaths. Footsteps echoed from the hallway, slow and deliberate. Glenn Collins had been jolted from his sleep, instinctively reaching for the baseball bat he kept by his bed. His heart raced, not from the threat of thieves, but from an unshakable sense of ownership. No one had the right to invade his sanctuary. He stepped into the kitchen, the shadows dancing around him as he scanned the room. There, crouching behind the island, were two men whose decisions had led them to this moment. Glenn felt the weight of his bat, a symbol of protection firm in his grip. He called, his voice steady, cutting through the thick air. Jack and Leo froze, realization crashing over them like a wave. Leo whispered, "There's no way out," Jack replied through clenched teeth, panic bubbling under the surface. Glenn's voice rumbled again, the authority in his tone unmistakable. He stepped closer, shadows elongating as he prepared for confrontation. With adrenaline fueling their minds, they knew they had to act fast. Jack blurted, stepping out from behind the counter, hands raised defensively. Leo followed, his heart pounding in his chest. "We're just here for some cash." But Glenn's eyes remained cold, scanning the intruders. "You think I'm going to let you just walk away with what's mine?" Jack's bravado dissolved with the realization that there was no easy escape. "We just need the money. It's been tough. We didn't mean to," but before he could finish, Glenn interrupted. "Do you know what hard work really looks like? How about this? You want cash? You'll earn it." The audacity of Glenn's suggestion stunned both men. Leo stammered, confusion flooding his mind. "You heard me," Glenn said, lowering the bat slightly but maintaining a grip that conveyed his strength. "You can work on the farm." Their faces were a mix of disbelief and desperation. Finally, after a heavy moment that felt like an eternity, Jack nudged Leo. "We'll do it," he said slowly, his voice almost trembling. "Fine, get some sleep in the barn tonight," Glenn replied, a flicker of relief passing over his face. As they shuffled to the barn, the weight of their choices settled heavily on their shoulders. The barn smelled of hay and animals, an earthy scent that felt like an unexpected embrace after the roller coaster of emotions they had just faced. But would it be a lifeline or just another trap? That night, as Jack and Leo lay on the straw, each contemplating the strange turn of events, they couldn't shake the feeling that perhaps this was a turning point. They were placed in a situation far different from what they had envisioned just hours ago, the precipice of change hanging in the air. As dawn broke, Glenn stood at the barn entrance, sunlight spilling over the fields, awakening life that had been lying dormant. He called, voice energetic yet commanding. As Jack and Leo emerged, they felt the warmth of the sun against their faces, an unfamiliar but comforting sensation. Glenn wasted no time, leading them through the winding paths of the farm and explaining their responsibilities for the day. Planting seeds, fixing fences, tending to the animals, they would learn the core of agricultural life. The sun climbed higher, bathing them in heat as they plunged into the rhythm of farm life. They worked hard, exhaustion mingling with a sense of emerging purpose. But amid the toil, Glenn always kept a watchful eye, not just for their productivity, but for the sincerity of their intentions. During a break, they gathered under the shade of an old oak tree, perspiration glistening on their foreheads. Glenn turned to them, curiosity etched into his face. "How did you end up on this path?" Jack took a deep breath, finally laying bare the truth. "I lost my job a while back. Bills piled up. I didn't know what else to do." Like a punch to the gut, Glenn felt sympathy wash over him. He'd seen desperation and wrong choices in his own life, battles fought daily. "Listen," he said, locking eyes with them. "You two have more potential than you realize." Days turned into weeks, and the farm slowly transformed, much like its new workers. Jack and Leo found not only new skills, but also found themselves shedding their previous identities. They learned about crops, seasons, and how resilience shaped every patch of earth. As harvest time approached, the air filled with excitement. cornfields ripened, heavy with promise, and Glenn decided it was time to bring the community together. He invited friends and neighbors to help, turning the last harvest into a celebration of new beginnings. Jack and Leo felt an unfamiliar sense of belonging as they worked side by side with the community. They laughed, shared stories, and embraced an existence rooted not in theft but in togetherness. Each time they shared laughter, they found a piece of their souls reborn. But just as hope took root in their hearts, the world outside loomed ominously. One evening, Glenn noticed a flicker of worry cross Jack's face. Glenn asked, sensing an undercurrent of tension. Jack hesitated. "What happens when the harvest is done? We can't stay here forever." He trailed off, the uncertainty evident in the quiver of his voice. Leo nodded, his gaze troubled. "What if someone finds out who we really are?" Glenn could see they were grappling with ghosts from their past, and that darkness still lurked behind their eyes. "You don't have to return to that life. You've earned my trust." Each day the pressure mounted. They were taking steps forward, but the weight of their past pressed down on them, casting long shadows over their newfound purpose. Would they ever shake off the fear that their old lives would catch up with them? As harvest neared completion, neighbors gathered for one last evening of celebration. Jack and Leo stood side by side, the camaraderie of the community wrapping around them like a warm cloak. Laughter echoed in the night as they shared stories under the stars, but in the back of their minds, a gnawing anxiety lingered. Would they be forced back into the shadows? Just as Jack took a deep breath and resolved to move forward, a car's headlights pierced the darkness, illuminating the barn. Leo exclaimed, panic coursing through his veins. Glenn's expression hardened. "Stay close," he instructed, leading them into the shadows as the car came to a halt. The sound of boots crunching against gravel filled the air, growing closer. A voice called out, "Hey, we know you're in there." Fear paralyzed Jack and Leo as they exchanged frantic glances. The past they thought they had left behind had just crashed into their present, and now the weight of their decisions bore down on them once more. Would they have to run again? Would it all be lost? The headlights faded for just a moment, but the sound of footsteps grew louder, more urgent. Jack felt a sense of dread settle over him like a storm cloud. This was the moment of truth. "Get ready," Glenn whispered, his tone resolute. As the barn door creaked open and shadows swept across the thresholds, Jack's heart raced and his breath hitched in his throat. This would either be a moment of redemption or it could turn their lives into chaos once more. With the intruders closing in, Jack knew they might be caught red-handed, and the uncertain storm of their past was about to crash down. Everything they had built, every moment of growth, hung in the balance, teetering on the brink of a decision they could never take back.